I woke up with a dry throat, a plastic band on my wrist, and the sound of a heart monitor tapping beside me. For a moment, I did not know where I was. Then I heard my daughter outside the door. "He won't remember anything," she said. "Just list it before he wakes up enough to argue." I kept my eyes half closed, not because I was calm, because I could not lift my own hand yet. My phone buzzed on the little table beside the bed. I turned my head just enough to see the screen. Gaston Property. Coming soon, listing review. My house. My address. The place where my wife had spent years helping older people read the fine print others hoped they would miss. Welcome to Final Act Revenge. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. And please, take care of your health tonight. Back then, I thought my daughter was only trying to sell my house. I did not know the realtor was about to call the name on the deed, and it was not hers. A house can look ordinary from the street. Mine did. White siding, a narrow porch, one maple tree out front that dropped leaves into the gutter every fall, no matter how many times I cleaned it. But that house was never just wood and windows to me. My name is Miles Gaston. I was 72 years old when my daughter tried to sell my home while I was lying in an ICU bed. Before I retired, I worked as a municipal records supervisor in Dayton, Ohio. Not glamorous work. I spent most of my life with building permits, zoning letters, transfer forms, inspection cards, and dusty file boxes that smelled like old paper and tired coffee. People laughed when I said records mattered. They stopped laughing when a missing signature cost them money. I learned something in that job. A house always has two stories. One is the story people tell at the kitchen table. The other is the one written in ink, filed away, and pulled out when somebody decides love is no longer enough. My wife, Ellen, understood the first story better than I ever did. She had been a reading aide at an elementary school. Small woman, soft voice, patient hands. She could sit beside a child who hated reading and make that child feel like the page was not an enemy. After she retired, she started helping grown people the same way. It began with our neighbor, Hattie Monroe. Hattie came over with a Medicare letter and pretended she only wanted Ellen's opinion. But I saw the way her fingers held that envelope, like it might bite her. Ellen read it slowly at our kitchen table, line by line. When Hattie apologized for not understanding, Ellen touched her wrist and said, "Nobody is born knowing how to read fear." That was my Ellen. A month later, 3 people came on Saturday morning, then 6, then 9, if Hattie brought her casserole, which had enough salt in it to keep a driveway from freezing. Ellen called the back room the Gaston's Saturday Learning Room. It was nothing fancy. Folding chairs, a cheap coffee maker, old movies with large subtitles, a cardboard box full of sample bills, pharmacy labels, insurance notices, rental letters, and property tax forms. In the morning, Ellen helped people read the papers they were scared to sign. In the afternoon, I dimmed the lights and ran a movie. She used to say, "If people can read what they are asked to sign, they stand a little straighter." When Ellen died, I could not close that room. So I kept it going. Not perfectly. My coffee was worse. My knees complained. The old projector made a buzzing sound like a trapped bee. But once a month, the chairs opened. The blue library stamp came out, and people came through the side door with envelopes tucked under their arms. My daughter never liked it. Paige worked as a kitchen and bath showroom manager. She knew how rooms should look in photographs. Quartz counters, warm lighting, clean lines, resale value. I was proud of her, even when I did not understand the life she wanted. But she looked at Ellen's room like it embarrassed her. "Dad," she told me once, "buyers don't want a house full of folding chairs and old people's mail." I laughed then. I wish I had listened instead. Her husband, Troy, was quieter. That made him worse. He did not insult things first. He measured them. He stood in my hallway like he was already seeing numbers instead of walls. One Sunday, he tapped the doorframe and said, "This place has more value as inventory than memory." I told him it was not inventory. He smiled like I had already lost the argument. Weeks before I got sick, Paige started asking about folders, the deed, the property tax bills, Ellen's old papers. She said she only wanted to be prepared. That sounded reasonable. The worst betrayals often do. Lying in that hospital bed later, I remembered one question Paige had asked more than once. "Dad, where exactly do you keep Mom's yellow folder?" And that was when I understood she had not started planning after I got sick. I learned what happened in my house later. At the time, I was still in that hospital bed, staring at ceiling tiles and trying to make my fingers obey me. But houses remember things. So do cameras. So do children who are old enough to know when adults are lying. Paige used the spare key under the side planter. That bothered me when I found out. Not because she knew where it was. She was my daughter. She had always known. It bothered me because she used that key the way a stranger would use a code he had stolen. She walked in with Troy behind her and Susan Mayfield, the realtor, carrying a tablet and a soft leather folder. Susan told me later she thought it was a normal family situation. An older father in the hospital, a daughter arranging a sale, a husband talking about repairs. Nothing rare about that anymore, not when every old house seemed to be either too expensive to keep or too valuable to leave alone. Then Paige started giving orders. "Don't photograph this room yet," she said. She meant the back room, Ellen's room. The folding chairs were still stacked by the wall. The old movie screen leaned in the corner. A cardboard box of sample medical bills sat under the window. And on the small table was Ellen's blue library stamp, the one she used when people came over with letters they were too scared to read alone. Paige pointed at it like it was trash. "This has to go before pictures," she said. "Buyers don't need to see my mother's little pity project." Susan stopped typing. Troy gave a quiet laugh and took the Saturday matinee sign off the wall. "Sentimental clutter kills offers," he said. I have replayed that sentence more times than I should. Not because it was clever, because it told the truth about him. To Troy, my wife's kindness was clutter. The people she helped were clutter. The room where widows learned to read hospital bills before signing payment plans was clutter. Paige did not correct him. That hurt more. Susan asked the first good question in the hallway. "Do you have legal authority to sign for your father?" Paige did not blink. "Dad trusts me with practical matters." That answer would have sounded harmless to most people. Responsible, even. Adult. Organized. But Susan had sold enough houses to know the difference between confidence and paperwork. She asked, "Do you have a recorded power of attorney for real estate transactions?" Paige looked at Troy, only for a second. Troy stepped in smoothly. "Miles signed plenty over the years. We can get whatever you need. We just want to get ahead of the market." There it was again. The market. Not my recovery, not my wishes, not Ellen's room. The market. A little later, my granddaughter Piper came in through the back door. She was 16, with theater scripts always folded in her backpack and more courage than anyone in that house gave her credit for. She had left a school script on my kitchen counter. That was all. But when she heard Troy say, "The old man won't be back before closing if we time this right," she stopped in the hallway. She did not scream. She took out her phone. Piper recorded 12 seconds. 12 seconds can save a man's home. On the video, Troy's hand was on Ellen's sign. Paige was holding a roll of blue painter's tape. Susan stood near the doorway, watching too closely to be fooled. Then Paige saw Piper. Her face changed at once. Soft mother voice. Gentle eyes. The costume went on so fast it almost looked real. "Piper, honey," she said. "Grandpa needs us to be adults now." Piper looked at the sign in Troy's hand. "He's not dead," she said. Nobody answered her. That silence became its own witness. After they left, Susan went back to her office. She did not activate the listing. She opened a title pre-check instead. Name, parcel, recorded interests, owner contact. That was when the first crack appeared in Paige's plan, because the file did not read the way my daughter had described it. Susan Mayfield stared at my address on her screen, then at the line beneath the record. Later, she told me that was the first moment she stopped preparing to call Paige back. Instead, she picked up the phone and called another number. The strange thing about being sick is how small the world becomes. A bed rail, a plastic cup, a nurse's shoes passing the door, a clock you cannot turn your head far enough to read. I had spent my whole working life keeping records in order. If a permit was missing, I found it. If a property line was wrong, I checked the old map. If somebody claimed a signature existed, I asked where it had been filed. But in that hospital room, I could not even reach my own phone unless it was placed close enough to my fingers. That kind of helplessness teaches you who people really are. Janice Morrow came in after lunch. She was the hospital patient advocate, a woman with calm eyes and a voice that did not rush. She pulled a chair beside my bed instead of standing over me. "Mr. Gaston," she said, "I need to ask you something directly." I looked at her. "Did you authorize your daughter to list your home for sale while you were admitted here?" My mouth felt dry. "No." She waited, pen still. "Did anyone explain a listing agreement to you?" "No." "Did you ask to be moved permanently into senior care?" I closed my eyes for a second. "No." Janice wrote each answer down, not dramatically, not angrily, just clean and careful, the way good records are made. Then she said, "I'm adding a note that property discussions need your direct consent." That sentence should have comforted me. Instead, it scared me. Because if a hospital needed to write that down, it meant my daughter had already made people wonder whether my voice still counted. After Janice left, I lay there and replayed the last few months. Paige had not started with a listing. She had started with questions. "Dad, where do you keep the tax bills? Do you still have Mom's old paperwork? If something happened, who would know what to do? Wouldn't it be easier if I helped you organize everything?" Back then, I heard concern. Now I heard inventory. Troy had been worse, only quieter. He never grabbed. He assessed. He looked at my roofline, my porch steps, the old furnace vent, the side door Ellen's visitors used on Saturdays. Once, standing near my driveway, he said, "The right buyer would see potential here." I had said, "I still live here." He smiled. "I know. I just mean someday." Someday had arrived while I had tubes in my arm. That evening, my phone buzzed again. It was an old voicemail from Paige, one I had missed before the infection got bad. Her voice was low, hurried, like she was walking away from someone. "Troy says if we wait until Dad gets home, we lose the May buyers. We need momentum." I listened twice, then a third time, not because I misunderstood it, because I understood it too well. May buyers, not my rehab, not my lungs, not whether I could climb my own steps. Buyers. I felt something hot move through my chest, and for a moment the monitor beside me picked up speed. A nurse glanced in. I gave her a small nod, the kind men my age give when they are trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. I almost called Paige, right then. My thumb hovered over her name. But I remembered something I had learned from 40 years of records and complaints, and people swearing they had never signed what sat right there in the file. If you confront a liar too early, you teach them what to hide. So I did not call. Instead, I asked the nurse to place my phone on the blanket where I could reach it. I saved the voicemail. I took a screenshot of the listing email. I asked Janice for a copy of her note when it became available. Small things, dry things, the kind of things people overlook because they are not loud. By morning, Paige came into my room with coffee. She knew I could not drink yet. She kissed my forehead. She called me stubborn. She said she was only trying to make hard choices easier. I watched her hands. She did not touch my shoulder. She touched the little hospital table where my phone was lying. "Dad," she said softly, "you don't need to worry about paperwork right now." I looked at my daughter, and for the first time in my life, I wondered how long she had been waiting for me to be too weak to read it. She smiled like a good daughter, and I smiled back like a tired old man. But inside, I had already begun keeping records again, because I no longer believed Paige was afraid I would not recover. I believed she was afraid I would recover before the sale did. By the 5th day, the hospital stopped feeling temporary. That frightened me more than the IV lines did. People begin speaking differently around you once you stay in a bed too long. Nurses start asking about discharge plans. Social workers mention recovery timelines. Family members stop saying when you come home and start saying if. And somewhere inside all of that, a person can slowly disappear without anyone admitting it out loud. Susan Mayfield arrived just after noon. No perfume, no dramatic entrance. Just a navy blazer, sensible shoes, and a leather folder held against her side like she did not trust herself to set it down yet. She knocked before entering my room. That mattered to me. Paige had stopped knocking 2 days earlier. "Mr. Gaston?" Susan asked. I nodded. She pulled a chair beside the bed instead of standing over me. Another thing I noticed immediately. Realtors spend their lives reading rooms. Good ones also read people. "I wanted to speak to you directly before anything moved forward," she said. The words "anything moved forward" sat in the air between us. Not sale, not listing, not paperwork, anything. I asked her a simple question. "Did my daughter tell you I agreed to sell my house?" Susan took a breath before answering. That pause told me more than the sentence did. "She told me you understood it might become necessary." Necessary. Funny word. People use it when they want to make a decision sound moral instead of profitable. Susan opened her folder carefully. Inside were printed forms, draft descriptions, and a preliminary title report clipped together with yellow tabs. "I have not activated the listing," she said. That was the first hopeful thing I had heard all week. "Why not?" She hesitated again. "Because there are issues I could not ignore." I looked at her face then, really looked at it. Susan Mayfield was not trying to become part of my family drama. She was trying not to become part of a lawsuit. That honesty made me trust her more. She slid the listing agreement onto the tray table near my bed. There was my address. There was the asking price. There was a description of my porch that somehow sounded lonelier than the porch itself. And there was my name, signed, or something pretending to be my name. I stared at it for a long moment. The handwriting looked careful in the wrong places, too steady, too complete, like someone had copied the idea of my signature instead of the habit of it. Susan spoke quietly. "I never witnessed you sign this." I looked up. "Did Paige say she had power of attorney?" "She said you trusted her with practical matters." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had spent 40 years in records offices hearing people say almost exactly that sentence right before trouble started. "In real estate," Susan said carefully, "basically having authority and legally having authority are not the same thing." That line stayed with me. Basically, the most dangerous word in family disputes. Basically, he wanted this. Basically, she agreed. Basically, I'm next of kin. Basically, it's my house anyway. I asked Susan what else bothered her. She tapped the paperwork. "The seller disclosure forms were incomplete. Your daughter could not answer basic questions about the property." That made sense. Paige had never cared about the furnace, the drainage, the side gutter that froze every other January, or the basement leak Ellen and I patched 3 different times before finally fixing it right. But then, Susan showed me something worse. She handed me the draft listing description. "Charming older home, owner transitioning to care. Ideal bonus room for entertainment lounge, office, or guest suite." Entertainment lounge. That was Ellen's room. The room where widows brought insurance letters. The room where old men unfolded pharmacy bills with shaking hands. The room where my wife spent years teaching people how not to get trapped by papers they were embarrassed to admit they could not understand. Paige had turned it into a selling feature. I looked away from the page because suddenly the hospital room felt too bright. Susan lowered her voice. There was another issue. I waited. The preliminary title check showed a recorded interest connected to the property that your daughter never mentioned. That got my attention immediately. People hear the word title and think ownership is simple. It never is. A property is a long memory written in legal language. Who did you call? I asked. Susan met my eyes. Not your daughter. A silence passed between us. Outside my room, I could hear a food cart rattling down the hallway. Somebody laughed at a television somewhere near the nurse's station. Ordinary sounds, the world continuing while mine tilted sideways. Then Susan said the name. Celia Frost. My chest tightened slightly. I knew that name. Celia was a nonprofit property attorney Ellen had worked with years ago when the Saturday learning room started growing larger than our dining table could handle. Susan continued carefully. Mrs. Frost informed me there are restrictions tied to the property that prevent any listing from moving forward the way your daughter presented it. Restrictions, not ownership, not inheritance. Restrictions. That meant Ellen had done something important enough that Susan Mayfield refused to activate a sale without understanding it first. I wanted to ask 10 questions at once. Instead, I asked the smallest one. What exactly did my daughter tell you? Susan looked uncomfortable for the first time. She said you were becoming forgetful, that you understood independent living might not be realistic much longer, and that moving quickly would help avoid complications. There it was, the real wound, not the house, the story. Paige was building a version of me that could be managed instead of listened to. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw Ellen standing in that back room with one hand resting on the blue library stamp. If people can read what they are asked to sign, she used to say, they stand a little straighter. Maybe that was why Paige wanted the room erased before photographs, because the room itself was a warning. Before I tell you what Susan eventually found in those records, let me ask you something. If you woke up in a hospital bed and learned your own child had already started preparing to sell your home, would you confront them immediately, or would you stay quiet long enough to learn how far they were willing to go? Tell me honestly in the comments. Even now, I still do not know which choice cost me more. Susan stood to leave, then paused near the door. One more thing, she said. I looked at her. When I spoke with Celia Frost, she sounded less surprised by your daughter's actions than I expected. A cold feeling moved through me. Why? Susan tightened her grip on the folder. She said your wife prepared for the possibility that somebody might try this someday. Then she walked out of my hospital room, and for the first time since waking up in that ICU bed, I realized my wife may have seen this betrayal coming long before I did. By the time they moved me out of the ICU, my daughter had already started speaking about my future like it was a project timeline. That was the part nobody prepares you for. Not the pain, not the weakness, not the smell of disinfectant that follows you from one hospital floor to another. It is hearing people discuss your life in practical terms while you are still inside it. The rehab room was smaller than the ICU room. One narrow window, a reclining chair nobody ever looked comfortable in, a television mounted too high on the wall. Every hallway smelled faintly of soup and floor cleaner. The first morning there, Paige arrived carrying coffee and a folder. Not flowers, not photographs, a folder. She set it carefully on the tray table beside me like she was presenting a solution. How are you feeling today? She asked. Like a man who woke up to find his house listed online. She sighed at that, not angrily, tiredly. Dad, please stop making this sound cruel. That sentence stayed with me. Please stop making this sound cruel. As if cruelty only existed after somebody described it honestly. Paige pulled a chair close to my bed. Up close, I could see the exhaustion under her makeup, the sleeplessness, the pressure sitting behind her eyes. For one dangerous second, I almost felt sorry for her. That is the problem with family. Love keeps trying to explain things your instincts already understand. She opened the folder. There are a few forms we should talk about, she said carefully. Not sign, talk about. Inside were rehab extension options, property access permissions, temporary storage estimates, appraisal paperwork, and a brochure for Oak Bend recovery suites. The brochure had smiling, gray-haired couples walking through a garden nobody in real life ever looks that happy in. Paige touched the edge of it with one finger. It wouldn't have to be permanent, she said, just until things stabilize. What things? The house, your recovery, everything. Everything. That word again. I looked at the paperwork slowly, not because I was confused, because I wanted her to keep talking. One line caught my eye. Authorization for property preparation and staging access, not sale. Preparation, another careful word. Why would my house need staging? I asked quietly. Paige leaned back and crossed her arms. Dad, the roof needs work. The stairs are dangerous. The basement smells damp half the year. You can't keep pretending this place is manageable forever. Manageable. Another word people use when they are trying to shrink your life into a problem chart. I asked her something simple. Did you already decide I'm not going home? Her mouth tightened. I decided I don't want to find you unconscious on the floor 6 months from now. There it was. Fear mixed with ambition. Concern wrapped around control so tightly you could not tell where one ended and the other began. Before I could answer, Troy walked in, carrying his phone and a grocery bag. He smiled like we were all adults discussing sensible financial planning. How's the rehab food treating you, Miles? Like punishment with gravy. That made him laugh. Troy always liked me more when I sounded harmless. He sat near the window and immediately started talking numbers. Repair estimates, insurance increases, property taxes, buyer demand, spring inventory shortages. To Troy, every emotion eventually became math. Look, he said, nobody's trying to erase your life here, but the market is still moving right now. Houses in your area are getting multiple offers if they're staged correctly. My wife's room is not staging material. He gave a small shrug. That room limits buyer imagination. I stared at him. He kept going anyway. You've got folding chairs, old DVDs, boxes full of expired paperwork. Those papers helped people. Troy spread his hands like he was being reasonable. I'm not insulting your wife. I'm saying buyers don't emotionally connect to rooms that feel institutional. Institutional. That was the word he chose for Ellen's learning room. The place where widows sat at our kitchen table because they were too ashamed to admit they did not understand hospital payment plans. The place where veterans brought insurance letters they could barely read because their eyesight had failed before their pride did. Institutional. Paige rubbed her forehead. Troy, please. No, I said quietly. Let him finish, because I wanted to hear how much of my life sounded disposable when spoken out loud. Troy leaned forward. Miles, this isn't about sentiment. It's about unlocking equity while the market still supports it. There it was again. Equity, inventory, market. Every word carefully designed to avoid saying the actual thing. Your house is worth more to us sold than lived in. My phone buzzed then. A text from Piper. Grandpa, Mom and Dad are packing the movie room. Underneath was a photograph, the old projector cord wrapped in tape. Folding chairs stacked against the garage wall. The Saturday matinee sign leaning beside trash bags. Then another picture arrived. A cardboard box. Across the side, written in black marker. Remove elder use materials before photos. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to look away from the screen. Paige saw my expression. "What is it?" I turned the phone toward her. For the first time since this started, my daughter looked ashamed. Not guilty, ashamed. There is a difference. Guilt hurts because you know you did wrong. Shame hurts because somebody else can finally see it. "That wasn't supposed to," she started. "Finish the sentence," I said. She could not. Troy answered instead. "It's just staging language." Staging language. Like Ellen's blue library stamp was no different than an old lamp somebody moved before an open house. Paige stood suddenly and walked toward the window. "She helped people," she said quietly. "I know she did." "Then why are you trying so hard to erase the room?" Paige turned around too fast. "Because I'm tired," she snapped. "I'm tired of every conversation in this family turning into a shrine to sacrifice. Mom is gone, Dad. That room is not a person." The room went silent after that. Even Troy looked at her. But the worst part was this. I think she believed what she said, not because she hated Ellen. Because somewhere along the line, Paige convinced herself survival mattered more than memory. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. An older woman stepped inside carrying a bakery box tied with ribbon. Amberly Larkin, Troy's mother. "Thought you might enjoy blueberry muffins," she said warmly. She spoke softly, smiled softly, moved softly. The most dangerous people often do. Amberly set the bakery box down beside the Oak Bend brochure, already sitting on my tray table. Then she said the sentence that made my skin go cold. "Miles, nobody's taking your dignity. We're just helping you accept the next season of your life." Next season. As if my future had already been scheduled without me. Then Amberly added something she probably did not realize would expose everything. The downstairs suite in the Kettering place would actually work beautifully for family visits. Kettering place. I had never heard that phrase before, but Paige froze. Troy looked down immediately. And just like that, I understood something they never meant to tell me. They had already been shopping for the next house, before mine was even sold. The next morning, I stopped pretending to myself that this was only about money. Money was part of it, but control, that was the real thing sitting underneath everything else. Control over where I lived. Control over who spoke for me. Control over whether people saw me as a father or a burden waiting to be managed. And somewhere inside all that control was Ellen. Not just her memory, her planning. Celia Frost arrived just after 10. I had not seen her in nearly 4 years, not since Ellen's memorial service. She looked almost exactly the same. Silver hair pulled back neatly, reading glasses hanging from a chain, folders tucked under one arm like they were part of her skeleton. Some people carry authority loudly. Celia carried it quietly. She closed the rehab room door behind her before speaking. "How strong are you feeling today, Miles?" "Strong enough to find out what my wife knew that I didn't." That earned the smallest smile from her. She sat beside my bed and placed 2 folders on the tray table. One was thick and neatly tabbed. The other was thin, old, and sealed with Ellen's handwriting across the front. "For Miles, if somebody ever tries to turn the house into an exit plan." My chest tightened the second I saw it. I reached for the envelope slowly. Even after all those years, Ellen's handwriting still felt alive. Celia noticed my hands shaking. "You don't have to open it yet," she said gently. "I think I do." But before I opened anything, Celia pulled out a property diagram and several recorded documents. "This is going to sound more complicated than it actually is," she said. "So I'm going to explain it like Ellen asked me to." That sounded exactly like my wife already. Simple first, panic later. Celia adjusted her glasses. "You still fully control your right to live in the house. Nobody can remove you. Nobody can force a sale. Nobody can stage a transfer around your hospitalization." I stared at her. "What do you mean nobody can?" She slid one page toward me. because years earlier, Ellen had quietly changed the structure attached to the property deed. Not ownership, protection. The house was tied to a life estate arrangement connected to the Gaston Saturday learning room. I blinked at her. The room? Celia nodded. Your wife became concerned after several older adults she helped were pressured into signing property documents they did not fully understand. She worried about what could happen if you were ever sick, isolated, medicated, or unable to review paperwork properly. For a second, I could not speak. Not because I was confused, because I suddenly realized Ellen had not only been helping strangers all those years, she had been preparing for us. Celia continued carefully. The recorded structure means your daughter cannot independently list, transfer, refinance, or market the property without your direct, verified participation. And because the learning room holds a protected remainder interest, any transaction attempt made during hospitalization or medical vulnerability triggers additional review requirements. I looked at the papers again. All this time, Paige thought being my only daughter made her next in line. But Ellen had never believed family titles alone were enough protection. That was the twist sitting beneath everything. My wife had trusted love. She just had not trusted pressure. Celia handed me another document. At the top was the official purpose statement Ellen wrote years earlier. To help older adults read, understand, and question documents before signing them under pressure, confusion, fear, or dependency. I laughed once under my breath. A sad laugh. Of course she did. Celia tilted her head. She understood something most people don't, Miles. Elder abuse rarely starts with violence. It usually starts with urgency. Urgency. Sign now. Decide now. Move now. Before the market changes. Before the paperwork gets harder. Before you become a problem. Everything suddenly fit together so cleanly, it made me sick. Paige had not woken up one morning and become evil. Pressure had been building for years. The showroom job, the debt, the image, the upgrades, the need to keep climbing into a life more expensive than the one she could actually breathe inside. And Troy had simply given that pressure a business plan. I asked the question sitting in my throat. So, the house is protected? Yes. Then why does it feel like I'm still losing? Celia leaned back slightly. Because protection and proof are not the same thing. That sentence landed hard. She explained carefully. The deed structure blocked the sale itself. That part was safe. But if Paige claimed she was only acting out of concern, if Troy argued they misunderstood the restrictions, if they said they were trying to prepare for possible future care, then legally and socially, the story became messy. And stories matter, especially inside families. Right now, Celia said, they still believe they are helping you. I almost snapped back at that. But then I remembered Paige's face in the rehab room. Not triumphant. Desperate. Desperate people are dangerous because they can convince themselves almost anything is necessary. Celia opened another tabbed section in the folder. Your daughter already created exposure for herself. She pointed at the notes. Hospital records showing no consent. The staged listing language. The attempts to remove evidence of the learning room before photography. The pressure during medical recovery. The recorded statement from Susan Mayfield. The video Piper captured. Then Celia looked directly at me. But if you confront them too early, they'll stop talking. And right now, they're still saying too much. That sounded cold. Practical. Exactly like something from a records office, and I hated how correct it felt. I finally picked up Ellen's envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller paper clipped behind it. The first line hit me harder than I expected. Miles, if you are reading this, somebody probably decided your illness made your voice negotiable. I stopped breathing for a second. Celia quietly looked away to give me privacy. I kept reading. I do not believe Paige is cruel, but I believe fear changes people. especially when money and exhaustion begin sounding like responsibility. If anybody ever tries to turn our home into a transaction while you are too weak to argue clearly, make them read every page out loud. Never rush. Never sign tired. Never let urgency speak for dignity. My vision blurred after that. Not because Ellen was gone, because even dead, she was still protecting me better than I had protected myself. Behind the letter was the smaller document, a review clause. Any attempt to market or transfer the property while I was hospitalized, medicated, cognitively questioned, or under care review could trigger formal scrutiny tied to the learning room protections. Not punishment, protection. That mattered. Ellen never built traps, she built brakes. I leaned back against the pillow slowly. So, Paige can't sell the house? No. Troy can't refinance it? No. And the listing dies the moment this review becomes formal? Yes. For the first time since waking up in the ICU, I felt something dangerous begin returning to me. Not anger, patience, the kind that waits quietly while other people keep exposing themselves. Celia gathered the papers back into the folder. "One more thing," she said. I looked up. "Your daughter still doesn't fully understand what Ellen recorded." That surprised me. How? She saw herself as your heir. Ellen saw the house as your protection first. The room fell silent after that. Outside my window, somebody in rehab therapy laughed at something down the hallway. A cart rolled across tile floors. Life kept moving. But inside that small room, the balance of the story had shifted. Not publicly. Not yet. Paige still thought she was managing a weak old man. Troy still thought he was ahead of the paperwork. Amberly still believed my future had already been organized for me. But now, I knew something they didn't. Ellen had already prepared for the exact moment my family would mistake my illness for permission. And for the first time since this began, I stopped wondering how to save my house. I started wondering how much more my daughter was willing to say before she realized the house was never hers to sell. Recovery is a strange kind of loneliness. People clap for small victories that would have embarrassed you 6 months earlier. Standing without help, walking to the bathroom alone, remembering all your medications without looking at the chart. Meanwhile, your actual life keeps moving somewhere else without you. By the second week in rehab, I could walk short distances with a cane. Slowly, carefully, like my body no longer fully trusted the ground beneath it. Paige visited almost every day. That was the confusing part. Cruel people are easier to survive, but my daughter still tucked blankets around my legs, still brought the brand of crackers I liked, still asked nurses whether I was sleeping enough. Then she would open a folder and start discussing my future like she was chairing a business meeting. That was how the line disappeared. One afternoon, she arrived carrying another stack of papers and sat beside my bed without taking her coat off. "We need to keep options flexible," she said. Flexible, another harmless-sounding word people use right before they try to corner you. I held out my hand for the folder. This time the papers were more aggressive. Authorization for temporary property access, approval for off-site furniture storage, consent for appraisal scheduling, a preliminary transition packet from Oak Bend Recovery Suites. At the bottom of one page was a line already highlighted in yellow. Extended rehabilitation stays may support future long-term care planning. I looked up slowly. Why is this highlighted? Paige crossed her arms immediately. Because we have to be realistic. There's realistic, and then there's replacing my front door before I'm even home. Her jaw tightened. You can barely climb stairs right now. That doesn't mean I stopped owning them. For a second, neither of us spoke. The rehab television hummed quietly in the corner. Somewhere down the hall, somebody was arguing with a physical therapist about pudding cups. Small, ordinary sounds. The kind that make painful conversations feel even more real. Then Paige rubbed her forehead hard and said something that finally cracked the mask. "You think I enjoy this?" she snapped. "I'm drowning, Dad." There it was. Not greed first, pressure, bills, mortgage payments. The image she spent years building. The fear of slipping backward after fighting so hard to climb upward. Part of me understood that. That was what made everything worse. Because if she had simply hated me, this would have been easier. Instead, my daughter loved me just enough to feel guilty, and not enough to stop. She opened her mouth again. You know what it's been like trying to hold everything together while you're in here? No, I answered quietly. But I know exactly what it feels like to realize my own daughter has been preparing my exit plan while I'm still alive. That hit her. I saw it land. But before she could answer, my phone buzzed. Piper. A video attachment. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The clip lasted less than 30 seconds. Troy was standing inside Ellen's learning room with a roll of contractor bags beside him. The folding chairs were stacked near the garage door. The old projector sat unplugged on the floor. And on the table, sitting beside a donation box, was Ellen's blue library stamp. I paused the video there. That stupid little stamp. Blue handle, worn rubber edge, tiny ink marks Ellen could never fully clean off her fingers after Saturday mornings. For years, it had touched Medicare letters, insurance notices, payment plans, utility shut-off warnings, property forms. Now it was lying beside a cardboard box marked, "Remove old age materials before photos." I stared at those words so long my vision blurred. Not because of the room, because of the phrase, old age materials, as if Ellen's work had become clutter the moment the market entered the conversation. Paige saw the screen and went pale. That wasn't supposed to be thrown away, she said immediately. Interesting thing about guilt. People rush to defend the object instead of the action. I looked at her carefully. You still let it happen. She sat down heavily in the chair beside me. For a moment, she looked less like my daughter and more like a tired stranger who had accidentally walked too far into a lie to turn around easily. Then she whispered the sentence that hurt more than anything Troy had ever said. Mom is gone, Dad. That room can't stay frozen forever. I swallowed hard. That room taught people how not to lose themselves. It's still just a room. No, I said softly. To your mother. It was proof people deserved dignity before signing things they didn't understand. Paige looked away immediately, because now she understood the irony too. She was trying to push papers in front of an old man recovering from illness, inside the exact house built to protect people from doing that. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then Paige said something I still think about. If you fight this too hard, people are going to start questioning whether you're thinking clearly. I felt my entire body go cold. Not angry, cold. Because there it was at last. The real weapon. Not the listing, not the market, not the rehab brochures. Narrative. If I resisted hard enough. Suddenly I became the difficult, elderly parent. The confused man, refusing help. The stubborn old homeowner, making life impossible for his exhausted family. I looked directly at my daughter. Did Troy teach you to say that? Her silence answered for her. That night I barely slept. Rehab hallways sound different after midnight. Slower, hollow. Machines beep softly in distant rooms while strangers dream behind half-closed doors. I kept seeing Ellen's stamp beside that donation box. Not because the stamp itself mattered, because it represented something Paige and Troy did not understand. Once people stop seeing older adults as fully capable of defending themselves, everything becomes easier to justify. Selling the house, moving the furniture, filtering information, making decisions for their own good. Around 1 a.m, my phone vibrated again. Piper. Just one message. Grandpa. Mom said if you keep resisting, people might think rehab should become permanent. I stared at the screen until my chest hurt. There it was. The bottom. Not the illness. Not even the betrayal. the realization that my own daughter had started treating my resistance as evidence against me. I sat there in the dark rehab room listening to the air vent hum above me, and for the first time since waking up in that ICU bed, I understood how older people lose their homes without ever signing anything willingly. They get exhausted, emotionally, physically, socially. Everyone around them slowly begins speaking, as if the decision has already been made. Then the person finally stops fighting, simply because they are too tired to keep proving they still deserve a voice. The next morning, Susan Mayfield called me before breakfast. Her tone was calm, professional. But underneath it, I heard movement. "We're ready," she said. I tightened my grip on the phone. "For what?" A brief silence passed. Then Susan answered with 7 words that changed everything. "We got them all in one room." The meeting happened in a rehab conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dry erase markers. Nothing dramatic about it. No courtroom, no police officers, no shouting crowds waiting for justice. That is how most family betrayals really end. Not with explosions, with paperwork. Susan Mayfield was already there when the nurse wheeled me in. Beside her sat Celia Frost, calm as ever, and Marla Quinn from the title company, a woman with sharp glasses and the kind of expression people develop after years of watching bad decisions arrive disguised as urgency. Janice Morrow stood near the back wall holding a clipboard. Then Paige walked in. She wore a cream-colored blazer and carried a leather notebook against her chest like she was arriving for a business presentation. Troy followed behind her with a tablet under one arm. Amberly came last, smiling softly at everyone in the room as if we were all gathered for a difficult but loving family discussion. That smile almost impressed me. Some people can turn manipulation into hospitality. Paige looked surprised to see Susan. Then she saw Celia. And for the first time in weeks, my daughter hesitated. Not long, just enough. "What exactly is this meeting?" she asked carefully. Susan answered before anyone else could. "A clarification of authority regarding the Gaston property." Authority? There was that word again. The room settled into silence after that. Paige sat across from me and folded her hands together neatly. If someone had walked in without context, they would have seen a concerned daughter trying to help her aging father navigate difficult decisions. That was the danger of appearances. Troy broke the silence first. "Look, I think everybody's overcomplicating this," he said. "Miles needs support. The house needs work." Paige was trying to create options before things became more difficult. Create options. Another polished phrase designed to hide a knife inside velvet. Amberly nodded gently. Sometimes families have to make hard transitions before a parent hurts themselves, trying to hold on to independence. There it was again. Transition, care, safety. Every word carefully chosen to make resistance sound selfish. Paige leaned forward slightly and softened her voice. "Dad has always been proud, but pride isn't a care plan." For a second, I almost admired how convincing she sounded. Almost. Then Susan opened her folder. "Mrs. Larkin," she said calmly, "who authorized you to sign the listing preparation documents?" Paige answered immediately. "My father has always trusted me with practical matters." Marla Quinn finally spoke. "Practical matters do not transfer legal listing authority." That sentence hit the room harder than anyone expected. Troy shifted in his chair. Paige blinked once. Then she recovered quickly. "Nobody said I was forcing a sale." Susan slid the unsigned draft listing onto the table. "The problem isn't whether the sale completed," she said quietly. "The problem is that steps toward marketing the property began without verified authority from the property holder." Property holder, not daughter, not caregiver, not future heir. Property holder. Marla turned her laptop toward the room. A title report filled the screen. Parcel number, recorded documents, transfer history. Then the ownership structure appeared. Life estate interest, Miles Gaston. Protected remainder structure connected to Gaston's Saturday learning room. Paige frowned immediately. That's Mom's community project. No, Celia corrected gently. It's a recorded legal protection. Silence. Real silence. The kind that changes temperature. Celia opened one of Ellen's old documents and continued. Years ago, Ellen Gaston requested additional review safeguards connected to the property in the event Mr. Gaston became medically vulnerable, hospitalized, cognitively questioned, or pressured during any proposed property transaction. Paige looked stunned. Troy looked angry. Amberly looked frightened for the first time. Because suddenly this was no longer about a daughter helping her father make difficult choices. Now it was about documented protections specifically designed to stop what they were trying to do. Paige straightened in her chair. So what? We misunderstood paperwork? No, Susan said carefully. You misunderstood ownership. That line landed hard. Marla continued reviewing the file. No listing, transfer discussion, staging authorization, or property marketing process could move forward without direct, confirmed participation from Mr. Gaston under the recorded review conditions. Troy leaned forward immediately. This is ridiculous. Nobody was stealing anything. Celia met his eyes calmly. Then why were materials connected to the learning room removed before photography? Nobody answered. Susan placed printed emails onto the table. Remove elder use materials before photos. Troy looked down at once. Janice Morrow stepped forward quietly. I also documented that Mr. Gaston directly denied authorizing any listing activity while hospitalized. Paige's voice sharpened slightly. He was heavily medicated. Janice did not react emotionally. At the time of documentation, he was alert, oriented, and capable of answering clearly. That hurt Paige more than anger would have, because records do not care about intentions, only statements. Paige looked at me finally, not at the others, at me. Dad, you really think I was trying to hurt you? That question sat inside me longer than she probably expected, because the truthful answer was complicated. No, I said quietly. I think you convinced yourself hurting me was necessary. Her face changed after that. Not outrage, recognition. Troy jumped in quickly before the silence grew worse. This entire thing is being twisted. Paige was trying to keep your life from collapsing. I looked directly at him. No, you were trying to keep her lifestyle from collapsing. The room went dead quiet. Amberly inhaled sharply. Paige lowered her eyes, and for the first time since this began, Troy had no polished response ready. Then Marla spoke again. There's another issue. Everyone turned toward her. She rotated the screen slightly. Timeline records appeared. Ring camera entry logs, listing preparation timestamps, email correspondence, hospital intake dates, 7:42 p.m., Troy entered property, 8:16 p.m., staging coordination email sent, 8:31 p.m., owner transitioning to care description added. Following morning, seller preparation forms submitted. Hospital note later confirmed no consent. Each line landed like another brick. Not dramatic, worse, documented. Troy rubbed his jaw tightly. We were preparing options. Celia folded her hands together. Were you also preparing options when you discussed removing the learning room before photographs? Again, silence. Then Susan looked directly at Paige. Why did you never mention the property protections? Paige answered too quickly. Because I didn't think they mattered. That was the moment everything finally became clear. She truly believed inheritance was automatic, that being the daughter meant becoming the decision-maker the moment weakness entered the room. But Ellen had built the paperwork specifically to slow that moment down, not to punish Paige, to protect me from becoming manageable. Celia pulled one final paper from Ellen's folder, the purpose statement for the Gaston Saturday Learning Room, to help older adults read, understand, and question documents before signing them under pressure, confusion, fear, or dependency. Nobody moved after she read it. because every person in that room suddenly understood the same thing. The house itself had become the final lesson Ellen ever built. Then Paige asked the question that changed the air completely. What happens if the listing already has my father's signature on it? Susan slowly opened a second folder, and when I saw the expression on her face, I realized my daughter had just walked herself into something even worse than losing the sale. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Susan opened the second folder. You could actually hear the heating vent humming above us. That is the thing about truth. When it finally enters a room, people stop moving the same way. Susan slid 2 pages onto the table carefully. One was the listing preparation form carrying my name. The other was a copy of an older municipal document I had signed years earlier. Not to accuse, to compare. "I never witnessed Mr. Gaston sign the listing paperwork," Susan said calmly. "And because he was hospitalized, medically vulnerable, and operating under recorded review protections, I could not treat the signature as valid without direct confirmation." Paige's face lost color immediately. Troy leaned forward. "So, what are you saying?" Susan did not rush her answer. "I'm saying I refused to activate the listing because too many warning indicators existed at the same time." Warning indicators. Not crimes, not accusations. Facts. Hospitalization. No direct consent. Unverified authority. Property protections. Pressure to move quickly. Removal of learning room materials before photography. One by one, the story they built began collapsing under its own paperwork. Paige tried to recover first. "You're making this sound malicious," she said sharply. "I was trying to help my father prepare." Janice Morrow stepped closer to the table and opened her clipboard. At 2:14 p.m. on May 12th, Mr. Gaston clearly stated he had not authorized any listing, transfer discussion, or permanent care transition. Her voice never rose. That made it worse. At 2:16 p.m., Janice continued, Mr. Gaston requested that all property-related decisions require direct communication with him moving forward. Paige swallowed hard. "He was exhausted," she said quietly. Janice met her eyes. "He was coherent." That word cut deeper than anger ever could. Coherent, meaning my voice still counted. Marla Quinn rotated the title report again. "Under the recorded property protections connected to the Gaston Saturday Learning Room," she explained, "any attempted transfer, marketing activity, or listing discussion during medical vulnerability automatically requires heightened review." Amberly finally spoke up. "This feels excessive." Celia Frost answered her immediately. "No, it feels documented." Silence again, the kind that presses against your ribs. Then Susan reached for another page, an email printout. "Remove elder use materials before photos." Troy looked down the moment it touched the table. Susan placed another sheet beside it. The draft listing description. Owner transitioning to care. Entertainment lounge potential. Guest suite conversion. Every line that once sounded polished now looked ugly, sitting under fluorescent lights beside hospital records. I watched Paige reading them. Not crying. Not yet. Just realizing how different words sound when someone else reads them back to you slowly. Then the conference room door opened. Piper stepped inside beside Hattie Monroe. My granddaughter looked nervous, but she did not look uncertain. That mattered more. Paige turned immediately. "Piper, you shouldn't be here." Piper held her phone tightly against her chest. "I asked to come." Troy exhaled sharply under his breath. Bad move. Because the moment adults start acting afraid of a teenager telling the truth, everybody notices. Susan nodded toward Piper gently. "Would you like to explain the video you recorded?" Piper looked at me first. I gave her a small nod. She opened the clip. The room filled with Troy's voice. "The old man won't be back before closing if we time this right." No one moved. Not Amberly. Not Paige. Not even Troy. Then the image froze on the Saturday matinee sign being removed from Ellen's wall. Piper's voice trembled slightly. "Grandpa loved that room," she whispered, "and they were talking about it like it was garbage." Paige shut her eyes. "Honey, you don't understand." "No," Piper interrupted softly. "I understand exactly what happened." That line landed harder than anything else in the room, because children know the difference between helping someone and preparing to replace them. Troy finally snapped. "This is insane. We were trying to keep the situation manageable." I looked directly at him. "You kept using that word because it sounds cleaner than profitable." His jaw tightened instantly. Celia leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Larkin, did you or did you not discuss property timing around Mr. Gaston's hospitalization?" Troy hesitated. That hesitation told the truth before he did. "We discussed market conditions." Susan placed another page down. "The voicemail transcript. If we wait until Dad gets home, we lose the May buyers." Paige stared at the paper like she had never heard her own voice before. That was the moment the room finally changed. Not legally, emotionally, because until then, Paige still believed she could explain everything away as concern. But now she was hearing herself the way strangers heard her. And strangers hear urgency differently when money sits behind it. Her voice cracked for the first time. "I was drowning." Nobody answered immediately, not because we lacked sympathy, because drowning people still know when they are pulling someone else underwater with them. Paige finally looked at me, directly. "I didn't want to lose everything." I spoke carefully. "So, you decided I should lose my home first." She started crying after that, quietly. Not dramatic tears, exhausted ones. But something inside me had already changed by then. I still loved my daughter. That was the terrible part. Love survives long after trust stops breathing. Marla Quinn cleared her throat gently. "The title company will not open any transaction process connected to the Gaston property under the current circumstances." Susan followed immediately. "The listing preparation file is being formally voided before activation." Janice added her own part. "And future property-related discussions will require direct documented consent from Mr. Gaston." Then Celia placed several prepared documents onto the table. Temporary communication restrictions, property access limitations, revocation of staging permissions, formal removal of Paige and Troy from independent property coordination. Amberly inhaled sharply. "You can't seriously be cutting your own daughter out." I looked at her calmly. "No, I'm stopping people from speaking for me without permission." That shut the room down completely. Piper reached into her backpack then and pulled something out carefully. Ellen's blue Lampu library stamp. She had rescued it from the donation box before the movers cleared the room. When she placed it in front of me, I almost lost my composure for the first time all day. The handle still had faint ink stains near the edge. I wrapped my fingers around it slowly. 40 years of records work teaches you something strange. Sometimes one stamp matters more than 100 speeches. Susan slid the final copy of the listing toward me. Blank now, dead, finished. I pressed the stamp down firmly, then onto the paper. Void. Wrong owner. Blue ink. Sharp edges. Impossible to ignore. Nobody spoke. Troy stared at the page like he had just realized paperwork could hit harder than fists. Paige looked at the stamp, then at me. Her mascara had finally started running. "Dad," she whispered, "is there any way back from this?" I looked at my daughter for a long time before answering. And the truth was, I honestly did not know yet. 3 weeks later, I walked back into my house with a cane in one hand and a paper bag of medications in the other. Slowly. That is how older men return to places they almost lost. The porch steps still creaked near the left rail. The hallway still smelled faintly like old books and coffee. Somewhere in the basement, the pipes knocked twice whenever hot water started running. Nothing looked grand. But for the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. Not because the paperwork said so, because nobody was speaking over me anymore. Home health nurses came twice a week after that. I hated the schedule at first, hated how everybody suddenly wanted to measure my strength in percentages and risk assessments. But healing has a way of humbling you. Sometimes dignity means accepting help. Sometimes dignity means refusing the wrong kind. Paige did not come back immediately. For a while, all communication went through Celia Frost exactly the way the restrictions required. Property discussions stopped. Listing conversations stopped. Troy stopped calling altogether once he realized paperwork could close doors faster than arguments could. Amberly mailed me a sympathy card with flowers printed on the front. I never answered it. Instead, I placed it inside a kitchen drawer I labeled "People Who Mistook Politeness for Permission." That little joke would have made Ellen laugh. Piper visited every Saturday. The first time she came back to the house, she carried Ellen's blue library stamp in multimiens, like something fragile enough to break if she breathed too hard near it. "I cleaned the ink pad," she told me proudly. I looked at the stamp for a long moment before taking it. Funny thing about objects, sometimes they survive people better than memories do. A week later, we reopened the Gaston Saturday Learning Room. Not perfectly. The folding chairs still squeaked. The old projector buzzed too loudly. One of the DVD cases smelled like basement dust and peppermint gum for reasons nobody could explain. But 9 people showed up anyway. Hattie Monroe brought casserole. Too much salt, just like always. An older veteran arrived carrying insurance forms in a grocery bag. A widow from across town brought a hospital billing statement she had been too scared to open alone. And Piper hung the Saturday matinee sign back on the wall exactly where Ellen used to keep it. When everybody sat down, the room grew quiet. They were waiting for me to say something wise. Instead, I held up a Medicare letter and said, "Today we read the small print first. The movie can wait 10 minutes." That got a laugh. Good, because pain sits lighter in rooms where people still laugh. Paige finally came by 2 days later, alone. No Troy, no folders, no market talk. She stood on the porch for almost a full minute before knocking. I opened the door slowly. For a second, she looked young again. Not like a showroom manager or somebody drowning in debt and image and panic. Just my daughter standing where she used to wait for Ellen to come home from school. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. I answered honestly. "That's because apologies sound different after paperwork." She cried after that. Not loudly, just tired. The kind of crying that comes when somebody finally runs out of explanations. I let her inside, but only into the kitchen. Not the learning room, not yet. Then I told her the conditions. If she wanted any path back into my life, she had to stop treating forgiveness like an emotion and start treating it like responsibility. First, she would write an apology to Piper for teaching her that older people become easier to control once they are sick. Second, she would attend one Saturday session and read aloud about elder financial abuse, property pressure, and legal consent. Third, every copy of every scanned document, property note, and listing communication connected to my house had to be returned permanently. And fourth, she had to admit in writing that I never agreed to sell my home while lying in that hospital bed. Paige nodded through tears. Not arguing anymore. That mattered. Troy never came back. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Some people confuse access with entitlement for so long they stop recognizing the difference between another person's life and an opportunity. Maybe he loved my daughter in his own way. But he also looked at my home and saw inventory before he saw memory. And once a man does that, it changes how you open your door to him forever. As for me, I learned something difficult through all this. Growing older is not what makes people vulnerable. Silence does. The moment older parents become too embarrassed, too tired, or too afraid to question paperwork, somebody else starts deciding what their life should look like. That is how homes disappear. That is how voices disappear. That is how dignity disappears. Not overnight, piece by piece, one practical decision at a time. Ellen understood that before I did. That is why she built protections into the house. Not because she hated our daughter, but because she understood pressure can slowly turn love into justification. And maybe that is the hardest truth of all. Most family betrayals do not begin with evil people. They begin with ordinary people convincing themselves urgency matters more than honesty. A home is not just walls and a roof. Sometimes it is the final place where a person's dignity still answers the door. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and thank you for caring about this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this story moved you even a little, please consider subscribing to Final Act Revenge. Another story is waiting for you on your screen right now, and according to YouTube, there's a good chance you'll enjoy that one too. Take care of your health. Read the small print carefully, and never let anybody mistake your kindness for permission.